My in-laws left me behind with my supposedly mute and bedridden sister-in-law, Sophie, while they took off for a luxurious vacation in Hawaii. Just before leaving, my husband, Ethan, turned to me and said firmly, "Taking care of her is your responsibility. Don't slack off." As soon as Ethan and his family were out the door, Sophie did something that completely caught me off guard. She sat up straight, stretched, and grinned. "All right, let's get going too," she said, her voice crystal clear. I stood there in shock. I'm 27 years old, and when I was younger, I dreamed of becoming a pop star. But as I got older, reality set in. By the time I was in my late 20s, I had let go of that dream and settled for a more stable life. I met Ethan through a mutual friend. To be honest, I started dating him mostly because my mom kept asking me, "When are you going to settle down and give me grandchildren?" Ethan and I clicked instantly, especially when I found out that he too had once dreamed of working in the entertainment industry. Now, however, he had a well-paying job at a prestigious trading company in Chicago. As for me, I worked at a bank after college, but I quit when we got married. One day, Ethan and I visited his parents' house. He had a younger sister, Sophie, who had suffered from a severe illness as a child. It started as a simple fever, but when it didn't go away, the doctors diagnosed her with brain inflammation caused by the flu. By the time they figured it out, it was too late. The fever had caused permanent brain damage, leaving her unable to speak and bedridden. Since then, her mother, Mrs. Whitmore, had been her primary caregiver. Oddly enough, Sophie and I got along right from the start. Even though she couldn't speak, she used sign language to communicate. Over time, I naturally picked it up too. One day, I playfully signed to her, "We're like best friends who've known each other forever, right?" She smiled and signed back, "Yes, let's stay best friends forever." I happily signed back, "Of course we will." Her mother, however, was the exact opposite of Sophie. Mrs. Whitmore was constantly sarcastic and critical of me. Ethan and I lived in a condo about 30 minutes from his parents' house, but that didn't stop Mrs. Whitmore from dropping by unannounced. Every time she visited, she would find something to complain about. Ethan's shoes are a mess. A man's shoes say a lot about his job. It's your duty to make sure they're spotless. Make sure you fold the laundry neatly. If you don't, Ethan will be in a bad mood. Never go to bed before Ethan, even if he says it's okay. A wife should always wait for her husband. For some reason, she always called him Ethany, like he was still a little boy. When we were dating, and even in the early stages of our marriage, Ethan was thoughtful and caring. If I wasn't feeling well and wanted to eat out, he agreed without hesitation. If I liked a designer handbag, he'd surprise me with it a month later. But about a year into our marriage, he started to change. Or maybe he just went back to who he really was. He started coming home late, reeking of alcohol. He claimed work was keeping him busy, even on weekends. He stopped inviting me to visit his parents' house with him. That, to me, was the strangest part. One day, I finally confronted him. "Ethan, you've been so distant lately. You barely talk to me anymore. It feels like you're not the same person." He glared at me for a second, then coldly replied, "That's not true. You're overthinking things." I refused to let it go. "I don't think I am. You've changed, Ethan." But he shut the conversation down immediately. "Stop bringing this up." Then he just walked away, leaving me standing there, confused and hurt. So when Ethan suddenly announced one day, "I'm going to my parents' house this Sunday. What are you going to do?" I was caught off guard. He had been going there alone for months. I quickly asked, "Can I come with you this time?" He let out a sigh. "That's why I'm asking." I jumped at the opportunity. "I'd love to. I've missed Sophie." Ethan didn't seem too thrilled about that. When I mentioned his sister, I noticed a faint grimace on his face. "Yeah, you and Sophie seem to get along really well, huh?" "We do. It feels like we've been best friends forever," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. That Sunday, we drove to his family's home in Montana. On the way, we stopped at a bakery to pick up some pastries for his mother. She was always hard to please, but pastries usually did the trick. When we arrived, Mrs. Whitmore greeted us. But the moment she saw me, her face scrunched up in disapproval. I handed her the pastries and said politely, "I brought these for you." She snatched the box, peeked inside, and scoffed. "Oh, these again? Getting a little boring. But if you insist, I'll have them." Her tone was as dismissive as ever, but when she turned to Ethan, her face lit up like a child receiving a new toy. Ethan asked, "Is Dad here?" His father, despite his age, was still working. "No, he's at a meeting. Why? Did you need something?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "Not really, just had something to discuss with him." I raised an eyebrow. "Something important?" Ethan shot me a sharp look and said, "It's none of your business." I was taken aback. "What do you mean? We're married. Of course it's my business." But before Ethan could reply, his mother cut in. "Exactly. If Ethan doesn't want to share something with you, stop being so nosy." Her words stung, but deep down I knew. Something wasn't right. Knowing it was pointless to argue with her, I kept quiet. Just then, Sophie appeared at the doorway, her eyes lighting up when she saw Ethan. "Oh, Ethan, you're here," she signed with a warm smile. One day, Ethan surprised me by suggesting a family trip to Hawaii. "How about you, sis?" he asked Sophie. She simply shrugged and signed, "I'll pass. I don't have a passport." That response caught me off guard. Ethan was always busy with work, so it was strange to hear him planning a vacation. "Ethan, is everything okay at your job?" I asked, still puzzled by the sudden plan. "Everything's fine," he replied, sounding slightly annoyed. "I wouldn't be suggesting this if work wasn't going well." As usual, Mrs. Whitmore shot me a disapproving glare and added her opinion. "You shouldn't meddle in Ethan's decisions. You're being too nosy." Then Ethan dropped a bombshell. "Actually, Lauren, the real reason I brought you here is because I want you to take care of Sophie while we're on vacation." I was taken aback. For a moment, I felt stung. Not only had Ethan not even considered bringing me on the trip, but he had planned all of this behind my back. But then I quickly realized that staying with Sophie was a much better alternative than being trapped in Hawaii with Mrs. Whitmore. "Okay, I'll take care of Sophie," I agreed. Still, I couldn't help but ask, "But did you really need to drag me here just to tell me that?" Ethan shrugged, looking almost smug. "Well, I figured if I told you in front of my mother, you'd be less likely to resist." He knew I'd probably be upset about not going to Hawaii, and of course his mother would back him up if I tried to argue. It was obvious they had planned this together, and I suddenly felt trapped. After the conversation ended, I made my way to Sophie's room. She was lying on the bed, but beamed when she saw me. "It's been a while. How have you been?" she signed. "I'm good," I signed back. "Ethan asked me to come over today, though it's strange because for months now he's been visiting without me." At that, Sophie's expression darkened. "My brother is always hiding something," she signed, her movements sharp and deliberate. "He's never been the open type." She then mentioned how Ethan and the rest of the family were planning a trip to Hawaii. "I'm staying behind, though," she signed with a mischievous grin, looking completely unbothered. We continued chatting, and for the first time, I started piecing things together. I had always wondered why Sophie was so kind and warm, while Mrs. Whitmore was so cold and dismissive toward her. And now, it was all starting to make sense. A few hours later, Ethan came to collect me, and we headed home. Just before I left, Sophie gave me a sly wink and signed, "I'll tell you soon." A fast forward to the day of the Hawaii trip. Ethan and I arrived at his parents' house, where his family was packing for their flight. Meanwhile, I was getting ready to stay with Sophie for the week. I brought my luggage to her room, and she greeted me with a playful grin. "It's happening," she signed, looking excited. When I returned to the living room, Ethan's family was finalizing their departure. Ethan's voice rose above everyone else's as he reminded me, "Taking care of Sophie is your responsibility. Don't slack off." Even Mrs. Whitmore added her usual sharp comment, "Be sure to get along well with Sophie. It's better for you to stay here anyway." Then she said something that made my stomach turn. "If anything happens to Sophie, it'll be all your fault. We'll hold you accountable." I couldn't believe the audacity of a family that was willingly abandoning their disabled daughter for a luxury vacation while placing all the responsibility on me. But instead of arguing, I simply turned and walked back to Sophie's room, unwilling to deal with them any longer. The moment I stepped inside, Sophie suddenly sprang up from her bed, with more energy than I had ever seen from her before. "Come on, let's get going," she said, her voice perfectly normal. I froze. My mind was racing. What? I managed to say, completely shocked. Sophie chuckled. "I told you, I can actually walk, and I can talk too." I stared at her in disbelief. "Since when?" "Since last year, I think," she replied casually, as if it was no big deal. "Why have you been hiding it from everyone?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around this bombshell. With a calm expression, Sophie began to explain everything. "Actually, there's something you don't know. My father and mother are both remarried. I'm my dad's child from his first marriage. Ethan and our other sibling are from my mom's side." Suddenly, everything clicked into place. Her mother's coldness, the way Sophie was treated like a burden. It all made sense now. "I had a feeling," I admitted. Sophie nodded. "Mom can't stand me. I didn't want to deal with her, so I pretended I couldn't talk or walk." She sighed before adding, "But Dad knows everything. He's always been on my side." As I processed everything, Sophie dropped another bombshell. "That's why I've decided. We're going to Hawaii too." I blinked in confusion. "What? You mean today?" "Yep," she grinned. "We'll even be staying at the same resort as Ethan and his family." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Wait, I'd love to go with you, but do you even have a passport?" Sophie's grin widened. "Of course, I secretly got it last month. And don't worry about money. Dad is paying for everything. Our flights, the resort, even your ticket." I was floored. "I see. I guess we're really going to Hawaii then." And just like that, our secret journey began. Now, Sophie and I hopped into a taxi to the airport. When we arrived, her father was already there, waiting to see us off. "Lauren, I know this must be a shock, but I hope you enjoy the trip," he said kindly. "Thank you," I replied, still a bit overwhelmed. "I feel bad that you're covering all the costs." "Don't worry about it," he reassured me. "As long as you two have a good time, that's all that matters." We boarded our plane, on a different airline from Ethan's family, of course, and arrived in Hawaii early the next morning. At the resort, Sophie and I checked into our room, both of us bubbling with excitement for the adventure ahead. As I unpacked, I casually mentioned, "Your father seems to have traveled a lot." "Yeah," Sophie nodded. "He's been on many international business trips. He's even been to Hawaii a few times." I raised an eyebrow. "So, what's the plan?" Sophie smirked. "I'm guessing my mom and everyone will be dining at the restaurant tonight. I think it's time for a little surprise." I chuckled, feeling a rush of excitement. "That sounds like fun." "But first," I added, "we should get some rest. We both have jet lag to shake off." "Good idea," Sophie agreed. "I couldn't sleep a wink on the plane." We showered, climbed into bed, and quickly drifted off into a much-needed sleep. By the time we woke up, it was already late afternoon, almost 4 p.m. Sophie was already up, putting on makeup when I stirred awake. "Sorry, I slept too long," I mumbled. "No worries," she said with a grin. "I just woke up too. We both needed it. Now we're fully charged and ready for battle." Around 7 p.m., I turned to Sophie. "I'll head down to the restaurant first to check things out." I snuck into the restaurant, staying hidden in the shadows near the entrance. Scanning the room, I quickly spotted Ethan and his family, sitting joyfully at a table in the far corner. But then I noticed something shocking. A young woman was sitting with them. I didn't recognize her. She wasn't there when they left for the airport. My stomach dropped. I inched closer, straining to hear their conversation. Ethan's mother sighed, her voice filled with disdain. "I'm glad it's not that woman tonight," she muttered. I really drew the short straw with her. "She's tainted our family." Ethan's voice followed, cold and sharp. "I want to divorce her and start over. I'll find a reason, and I'll squeeze every penny I can out of her." Mrs. Whitmore nodded approvingly. "Even if you don't have a solid reason, we can fabricate one." "She's such a bad match. I wish I could just throw her in the trash." I felt my chest tighten as I listened to them talk so casually about getting rid of me. They were celebrating with another woman at the table while plotting my downfall. I fought the urge to march over and expose them right then and there. Instead, I forced myself to turn away, my heart racing with anger. I hurried back to our room. The moment I walked in, Sophie looked up. That took a while. "What happened?" she asked, noticing the shock on my face. "I saw something." "Unbelievable," I whispered, still trying to process it. Sophie sat up, concerned. "What is it?" "Ethan brought a woman I've never seen before," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "And they were talking about divorcing me." Sophie gasped. "What? That's awful." I nodded, but strangely, I felt calm, almost relieved. "Honestly," I admitted, "now that I've seen him with someone else, I feel ready to move on. I can finally divorce him." Sophie's lips curled into a grin. "That's a good thing. So, shall we go make our entrance?" I smirked, my anger solidifying into determination. "Absolutely." With a mischievous glint in our eyes, we headed to the restaurant. We asked to be seated near Ethan's table, and the hostess placed us just close enough to hear every word. Ethan and his family were still deeply engrossed in their conversation, completely unaware of our presence. Their insults about me continued, and I couldn't help but laugh bitterly at how endlessly they could badmouth me. Sophie caught my eye and gave me a nod, our signal to begin the counterattack. I stood up and walked directly to their table, my voice loud and clear. "Are you all having a good time?" The shock on Ethan's face was priceless. His mouth dropped open. His mother's eyes widened in disbelief. For a moment, they were completely frozen. Finally, Mrs. Whitmore broke the silence. "What are you doing here?" Then her eyes snapped to Sophie. "And how is Sophie here without a wheelchair?" Sophie stood up, flashing a confident smile. "I don't need a wheelchair anymore." The entire room seemed to go silent as they processed her words. Ethan and his mother stared at Sophie, their minds struggling to catch up. Sophie folded her arms and smiled sharply. "Thanks to you," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I've regained my ability to walk and talk. I must have caused you so much trouble for all these years. But guess what? I'm fine now." Mrs. Whitmore's face turned pale. Ethan swallowed hard. When did you start talking again?" "Maybe about a year ago," Sophie answered casually. "Why didn't you tell us?" Ethan asked, still in shock. Sophie shrugged. "Because it was easier for me if you all thought I was still mute." Then she tilted her head and added, "And besides, I heard what you were saying about Lauren." Mrs. Whitmore turned ghost white. What do you mean?" she stammered, trying to backtrack. Ethan shook his head. "We weren't saying anything bad about you, Lauren." I smirked and pulled out my phone. "Oh, really?" I said. "Because I recorded everything? Would you like to hear it?" Ethan's face twisted in anger, but there was nothing he could do now. "Chat Yai, you've caused me nothing but trouble. Now you're making these ridiculous accusations," Ethan hissed, his face twisting in anger. I met his rage with cold resolve. "Once we get back, I'll be contacting my lawyer to start the divorce process," I said firmly. "And you can't deny what you've done. You're on vacation with another woman, plotting to leave me. Plus, you called marrying me a bad lottery ticket, so I expect to be compensated for that insult." Mrs. Whitmore, realizing they had been caught, immediately tried to change her tone. "Lauren, dear, I've always liked you. Let's try to work this out with Ethan. This woman means nothing to him." I let out a bitter laugh. "I'm sorry, but I can't live with a man who sees me as a bad lottery ticket," I said icily. "Enjoy your time with her, and don't be surprised if I seek compensation from her too." The other woman, now looking pale and terrified, sat frozen, her hands trembling. Ethan's face twisted with desperation. He suddenly fell to his knees. "Lauren, please don't make a big deal out of this," he begged. "My company has strict policies. If they find out, I'll lose my job." I shook my head, unimpressed. "You don't sound sorry at all," I said, my voice calm but cold. Ethan was visibly shaken, but he wasn't giving up just yet. "I beg you, please forgive me," he pleaded, his voice laced with panic. "If my company finds out, I'll lose everything." I stared at him without a hint of sympathy. "You should have thought about that before," I said. "You are married, yet here you are in Hawaii with another woman. I will never forgive you." Hearing my harsh words, Mrs. Whitmore collapsed to her knees beside Ethan, her tears flowing freely. "Please, Lauren, forgive my son," she sobbed, her voice trembling with emotion. By now, the entire restaurant was watching us. The scene had drawn so much attention that the manager began approaching our table. I stood up, not wanting to continue the spectacle any longer. "Sophie and I will head back to our room now," I said coolly. "Enjoy the rest of your Hawaiian vacation. I suppose things will get a little more complicated when you return home." Ethan, now sobbing uncontrollably, shouted after me, "Please forgive me. I can't afford to pay any compensation." His outburst caused the restaurant manager to frown. The manager turned to a nearby staff member, whispering something before politely but firmly addressing Ethan. "Sir, you are disturbing our other guests. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Ethan, still in shock, seemed unable to process the words. Within moments, 2 large security guards appeared. Without much effort, they grabbed Ethan by the arms and hauled him out of the restaurant. Even though he struggled and cried, he was no match for their strength. Mrs. Whitmore and the other woman sat frozen, their faces a mix of disbelief and humiliation. Sophie and I exchanged amused glances, surprised by how quickly everything had escalated. But deep down, I knew. Ethan had gotten exactly what he deserved. Your cheese. A week later, Sophie and I returned home. I heard that Ethan had been released shortly after being thrown out of the restaurant, but he had spent the rest of the trip in a state of shock, barely speaking. Not that I cared. The very next day, I visited a law firm where an old friend from college worked. Unfortunately, she wasn't there, but I was assigned a female lawyer who was sharp, confident, and easy to talk to. I explained everything, the infidelity, the lies, and the cruel way they had spoken about me. After listening carefully, she nodded. "Not only is a divorce possible," she said, "but you are entitled to alimony from Ethan. And if the other woman knowingly engaged in an affair with him, we may even be able to claim compensation from her too." A month later, the lawyer contacted me with an update. It was confirmed that Ethan had been seeing the other woman for at least 6 months. That meant I could legally demand financial compensation from her as well. Without hesitation, I told my lawyer, "Get as much alimony as you can from both Ethan and that woman." She smiled and gave me a reassuring nod. 2 months later, the divorce was finalized. Shortly after, a hefty sum of money was deposited into my account, alimony from both Ethan and his mistress. As I stared at the amount, I couldn't help but smirk. "Well, that's karma for calling me a bad lottery ticket," I muttered. 3 months later, out of the blue, Ethan and Mrs. Whitmore appeared at my door. To my surprise, they both looked gaunt, having lost a significant amount of weight. Their once confident, arrogant faces were now worn and hollow. I opened the door just enough to look at them. "What do you want?" I asked bluntly. "I have no desire to see either of you." Ethan's voice was weak and shaky as he spoke. "I'm sorry, Lauren. Could you lend me some money?" I raised an eyebrow. "Money?" He nodded miserably. "I lost my job. And the woman, she left me. I don't even have enough for food." Mrs. Whitmore, looking equally defeated, chimed in softly. "I've divorced my husband, too. I'm broke." Her voice trembled. "Please, Lauren, we're begging you." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. I crossed my arms and met their pitiful gazes with indifference. "Too bad," I said flatly. I stared at them coldly, my arms crossed. "I have absolutely no obligation to help either of you," I said, my voice void of any sympathy. "And even if I did, I wouldn't lift a single finger. Now leave." They stood there for a moment, speechless, as if they had expected some shred of mercy from me. But when it became clear that none was coming, they finally shuffled away, their shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched them go, feeling nothing but relief. After they disappeared from sight, I walked back inside. Then, without hesitation, I grabbed a large handful of salt and sprinkled it across the doorway, a final act to cleanse my home of their bad energy. As I watched the grains fall, I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. It was done. The final chapter of that painful part of my life was officially closed, for good.